The night was colder than usual for Texas. The wind carried a sharp chill, howling through the empty streets of the small town like a warning, bending the old trees that lined the cracked pavement. Heavy rain poured down, bouncing off the rooftops and forming small streams along the gutters. The entire town seemed asleep, wrapped in the kind of deep silence that only came with isolation. Marlon pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders, feeling the dampness seep through the worn fabric. He had just locked up his carpentry shop for the night, the scent of sawdust still clinging to his clothes. His hands were rough and calloused, proof of years spent shaping wood into something useful, something lasting. He walked slowly toward his cabin at the edge of town, his boots making soft splashes against the wet ground. This was his routine: work, go home, sleep. Nothing changed. It hadn't for years. Not since a bitter sigh escaped his lips at the thought of his wife. Her laughter had once filled their home. Her warmth had made life bearable. But that warmth had died with her 5 years ago, leaving Marlon in a world that felt empty, even when surrounded by people. Lost in his thoughts, he almost didn't hear it. A cry, faint, desperate, barely audible over the sound of the rain. Marlon stopped mid-step, his pulse quickening. He turned his head toward the sound, his sharp eyes scanning the dark street. It wasn't an animal. It was too human, too raw. A baby. His chest tightened. He stood frozen for a moment, his brain struggling to process what he had just heard. Then, as if on instinct, his legs moved. The sound was coming from near the old chapel at the edge of town, a place no one visited anymore. The building was a relic of another time, with its peeling white paint and broken stained glass windows. Weeds had overtaken the steps leading up to the entrance, and the wooden door hung slightly ajar, creaking whenever the wind pushed against it. Marlon quickened his pace, his heart pounding louder than the rain against the pavement. His eyes darted across the overgrown yard, searching, until he saw it. A cardboard box. It sat there, barely visible in the darkness, placed against the stone wall of the chapel. The rain had already soaked through parts of it, making the edges sag. The cry came again, weaker this time. Marlon's throat went dry. His hands trembled as he approached. He dropped to one knee, hesitating for only a second before peeling back the damp flaps. Inside, wrapped in a thin cloth that was no match for the cold, was a baby girl. She was impossibly small, her tiny hands clenched into fists, her skin pale from the chill. Her little chest rose and fell with quick, uneven breaths, and when she opened her mouth to cry again, no sound came out at first, just a desperate little gasp. She was weak. Marlon swallowed hard, his heart twisting in his chest. Who in their right mind would do this? Who could abandon a child like this, in the middle of a storm, with nothing to protect her? He looked around, hoping, perhaps irrationally, that he would see someone coming back, someone who had made a mistake and regretted it. But the streets were empty. The town was asleep. It was just him and her. Without thinking, he reached in and lifted her into his arms. The second she felt the warmth of his body, she whimpered and buried her face against his chest. She was ice cold, her tiny body shivering violently. "Jesus!" He muttered under his breath, his grip tightening protectively around her. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. Marlon turned on his heel and hurried back through the rain, his boots splashing through puddles as he moved faster than he had in years. His cabin wasn't far, but every second counted. By the time he reached his front porch, his coat was drenched, and the baby's breathing had become more labored. He fumbled with the keys, cursing under his breath, until the lock finally turned, and he pushed the door open with his shoulder. The cabin was small but sturdy. A single-room space with wooden walls, a fireplace in the corner, and a workbench cluttered with tools and unfinished carvings. It was simple, quiet, like him. Marlon kicked the door shut and rushed to the old couch near the fire. He laid the baby down carefully, stripping off the soaked cloth and wrapping her in the thickest blankets he could find. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but he knew one thing: she needed warmth. He sat beside her, rubbing her tiny hands between his own, willing the heat to seep into her fragile body. Slowly, her shivering lessened. Her breathing steadied. Her tiny fingers curled slightly against his palm. Marlon let out a shaky breath. He had no idea who she was. He had no idea what he was supposed to do next. But as he looked down at the helpless child in his arms, a thought settled deep in his chest, solid and unshakable. He had found her, and he wasn't going to let her go. If you like interesting stories, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. The cabin was dimly lit, the soft glow from the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. The scent of burning cedar filled the air, mixing with the dampness of Marlon's clothes as he moved through the room with quiet urgency. The baby, now wrapped in thick blankets, lay nestled on the worn-out couch, her tiny form barely noticeable beneath the layers of fabric. Marlon crouched beside her, his rough hands hovering over her delicate face, unsure of what to do next. Her breathing was steadier now, but every few moments she let out small, exhausted whimpers. Her cheeks were still cool to the touch, and the sight of her frailty sent a pang through his chest. He exhaled deeply, running a hand through his damp, graying hair. This wasn't a situation he was prepared for. He had spent years in solitude, his world reduced to the steady rhythm of his work, to the scent of wood and varnish, to the silence he had come to accept as his only companion. And yet, in a single night, everything had changed. The baby stirred, shifting slightly under the blankets. Marlon hesitated before reaching out and pressing a comforting hand against her back. She was so small, so vulnerable. A deep sense of responsibility settled over him, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Standing, he moved to the kitchen area, rummaging through the cabinets for anything that could help. He had no formula, no bottles. He hadn't needed those things in his life. The realization left a sinking weight in his stomach. The baby needed food. She needed care, and he had no idea how to provide it. His eyes landed on a small ceramic mug sitting on the counter. Warm milk. It wasn't ideal, but it was all he had. He poured some into a pot, heating it over the stove while stealing glances toward the couch every few seconds. The rain continued outside, tapping insistently against the windows. The storm hadn't let up, and for that, he was oddly grateful. It meant no one had come knocking. No frantic parents searching for their lost child. No neighbors whispering about the man who had taken in an abandoned baby. He tested the milk with the tip of his finger. Warm enough. Carefully, he poured it into a small spoon, carrying it back to the couch. Kneeling down, he hesitated for a second before gently pressing the spoon to the baby's lips. "Come on, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Just a little." The baby barely reacted at first, her tiny mouth parting just enough for a few drops to slip through. It wasn't much, but it was something. He repeated the process, patience growing with each careful spoonful. After a few minutes, her breathing evened out, and her small body relaxed slightly against the blankets. Marlon sat back, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He watched her for a long time, his mind racing with the reality of what had just happened. Someone had left this child to die. Someone had placed her in that box, in the cold, with no guarantee that anyone would find her. The cruelty of it sent a shiver down his spine. Who was she? Where had she come from? And, more importantly, what was he supposed to do now? He knew what the law would say. He should call the authorities, report the abandoned child, and let social services take over. That was the logical thing to do, the right thing. But as he looked down at her tiny face, peaceful for the first time since he had found her, a deep, unshakable instinct told him otherwise. He couldn't let her go. Not yet. Not without answers. Marlon leaned back against the couch, rubbing a tired hand over his face. He would figure it out in the morning. For now, she was safe. That was all that mattered. And for the first time in years, the silence of his cabin didn't feel quite so empty. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the small, dust-covered window of the cabin, casting a golden glow over the wooden floors. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp stillness that made the previous night feel almost unreal. But as Marlon stirred awake, shifting in his old armchair near the fireplace, the soft weight against his chest reminded him that it had been very real. The baby. She was still wrapped in the thick blankets he had bundled her in, her tiny body nestled securely in the crook of his arm. At some point during the night, he had fallen asleep holding her, unable to bring himself to leave her alone. She was so light, so fragile, her small fingers curled loosely against the fabric of his shirt. Her breaths were steady now, her warmth pressed against him in a way that felt oddly reassuring. Marlon took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling as he gazed down at her. A part of him had hoped that when morning came, he'd wake up and somehow have all the answers, that he would suddenly know what to do. But the light of day only brought more uncertainty. He needed to figure this out. Carefully, he shifted, cradling the baby as he rose to his feet. She stirred slightly, making a soft sound, but didn't wake. He laid her gently on the couch, adjusting the blankets around her before stepping back. She was safe for now. Now came the hard part. Marlon grabbed his coat, shaking off the lingering dampness from last night's rain, and threw it over his shoulders. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Just past 6 in the morning. The town would be waking up soon. He needed to start asking questions. As he stepped outside, the morning air hit him with a sharp chill. The roads were slick from the storm, puddles reflecting the clear blue sky. His boots made a quiet thud against the damp earth as he walked, his mind already running through the possibilities. Someone had to know something. The town wasn't big, just a few hundred people, most of whom had lived there their whole lives. Strangers stood out, and gossip traveled faster than the wind. If a woman had been pregnant recently, if someone had gone missing, if there had been talk of a troubled home, someone in town would have heard. His first stop was Maggie's diner, the heart of the town's early morning chatter. The bell jingled as he stepped inside, and the familiar scent of fresh coffee and fried bacon filled the air. A few of the usual early risers sat at the counter, nursing their cups of coffee, their conversations low and lazy. Maggie herself stood behind the counter, her graying hair pulled into a messy bun, wiping down a stack of plates. She looked up at him with mild curiosity. "Well, if it isn't Marlon Hayes," she said, setting down the rag. "You're out early." Marlon hesitated for only a second before stepping closer. "Yeah, I need to ask you something." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "This about work? 'Cause I told you, you undercharge for those chairs of yours. You could make a fortune if you—" "It's not about work," he interrupted, lowering his voice. "It's about a baby." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, but they caught Maggie's attention immediately. Her expression shifted from amusement to concern. "A baby?" she repeated, setting the plate down. "Whose baby?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." The conversation around them quieted as a few of the other patrons turned their heads slightly, pretending not to listen. But Marlon didn't care. He needed information. "I found her last night," he continued, keeping his voice level. "Out by the old chapel. Someone left her in a box. She couldn't have been more than a few weeks old." Maggie's hand flew to her chest. "Oh my God! Are you serious?" Marlon nodded. "I don't know who she belongs to," he said, "but someone does. A newborn doesn't just appear out of nowhere." One of the men sitting at the counter, a rancher named Tom Whitaker, frowned deeply. "A baby abandoned like that? In this town? That ain't right." Maggie shook her head, her face pale. "I haven't heard of any woman around here having a baby recently. Not one that wasn't accounted for." That wasn't the answer Marlon had hoped for. He pressed a hand against the counter, exhaling slowly. "Someone must have come through town," he said, thinking aloud. "A stranger. Maybe someone passing through." Maggie frowned, considering. "There was that girl," she started hesitantly. Marlon's eyes snapped to her. "What girl?" "A young woman," she said slowly. "Showed up about a week ago. She looked rough, like she'd been on the road for a while. Stayed at the old motel just outside town. I didn't talk to her much, but she seemed scared." Marlon's chest tightened. "Do you know her name?" Maggie shook her head. "No, but I remember thinking she was running from something. Or someone." A cold sensation settled deep in Marlon's gut. If this girl had given birth recently, if she had been the one to leave the baby at the chapel. Why? What had made her so desperate that she had to abandon her child in the dead of night? He straightened, his jaw tightening. He needed to find out more. "Thanks, Maggie," he said. "I need to check something." She nodded, still looking shaken. "You take care, Marlon. And that baby, she's lucky you found her." He left the diner, his mind a storm of questions. He had come looking for answers, and now he was afraid of what they might be. Marlon's steps were heavy as he made his way toward the outskirts of town, his thoughts racing faster than his feet. The motel Maggie had mentioned sat just past the gas station, a run-down place with a flickering neon sign and paint peeling from the wooden siding. It wasn't the kind of place people stayed in for long. It was the kind of place people hid. The road was still damp from the storm, puddles reflecting the clear morning sky. The crisp air bit at his skin, but Marlon barely noticed. His mind was fixed on one thought. If the woman Maggie had seen was the mother, then she had been desperate. Desperate enough to leave her baby in the freezing cold, hoping someone would find her before it was too late. But why? And where was she now? When Marlon reached the motel, he took a moment to steady himself. He had no plan, no clear idea of what he was walking into, but that had never stopped him before. The small front office smelled of stale coffee and dust. An old radio played country music in the background, the sound scratchy from weak reception. Behind the counter sat a man in his 60s, his thinning hair slicked back, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His name tag read Earl. Earl barely looked up. "Need a room?" "No," Marlon said, leaning on the counter. "Looking for someone." Earl finally glanced at him, squinting slightly. "You a cop?" Marlon almost laughed. "Do I look like one?" Earl smirked, taking a slow drag of his cigarette. "No. You look like a man who don't do much talking unless he has to." He exhaled a thin stream of smoke. "Who you looking for?" Marlon hesitated for only a second. A young woman, late teens, maybe early 20s, showed up about a week ago. Might have looked scared. Alone. Earl frowned, tapping his cigarette against an overflowing ashtray. Yeah, I remember her. Marlon felt his chest tighten. She's still here. Nope, Earl said, shaking his head. Checked out 2 days ago. Left in a hurry. Damn it. Marlon forced himself to stay calm. Did she say where she was going? Earl gave a dry chuckle. Didn't say much of anything, just paid in cash and kept to herself. But she was in bad shape, I'll tell you that much. Marlon's fingers curled into a fist. Bad shape how? Earl leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Like someone who hadn't slept in days. Jumped every time the door creaked. I thought about asking if she needed help, but, well, people who come here don't usually want to be found. That made sense. If she had been running from something, or someone, then she wouldn't have wanted to draw attention to herself. Marlon exhaled slowly. Did she have a baby with her? Earl's expression shifted. His casual demeanor faded just enough for Marlon to catch it. He knew something. Look, man, Earl said, rubbing a hand over his face. She didn't have a baby when she checked in. But one night, I heard crying. Not just once. A few times. Thought I was imagining it at first, but... He shrugged. Didn't hear it again after that. Marlon's stomach twisted. The timeline fit. If she had given birth recently, she had likely been hiding in that motel with her baby, trying to figure out what to do. And then, 2 nights ago, she had left. Without the child. Marlon's voice was quiet, steady. Do you remember what she looked like? Earl scratched his chin. Thin. Real thin. Like she hadn't eaten much. Dark hair, cut real short. She had bruises too. His gaze met Marlon's. Not the kind you get from falling. A slow, sinking feeling settled over Marlon. Bruises. She hadn't just been running from something. She had been running from someone. Earl sighed. I tried not to get involved, you know? People come through here with their troubles, and it ain't my business. But I had a bad feeling about her. Marlon nodded. He understood. But now, this wasn't just about a baby abandoned in the night. This was about a mother who had been afraid. A mother who had been forced to leave. And that meant she might still be in danger. Marlon straightened. If she comes back, call me. Earl raised an eyebrow. You really think she's coming back? Marlon wasn't sure. But he knew one thing. This woman wasn't just some nameless stranger anymore. She was connected to that little girl sleeping on his couch. And if she was in trouble, he needed to find her. Before someone else did. Marlon walked away from the motel, his mind tangled with questions. The weight of what he had just learned sat heavy on his chest. This wasn't just about an abandoned baby anymore. It was about a woman in danger. A woman who had left bruised, terrified, and possibly being hunted by someone she was desperate to escape. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows over the town. People were beginning their routines. Shopkeepers unlocking their doors, ranchers loading up their trucks, kids riding their bikes down the narrow streets. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But for Marlon, everything had changed. He needed more information, and he needed it now. His next stop was the sheriff's office. The station was small, just a one-room building with an old metal desk, a filing cabinet that looked like it hadn't been opened in years, and a single holding cell in the back that mostly stayed empty. Sheriff Doug Whitmore sat at his desk, lazily flipping through a newspaper, his boots propped up on the table. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with graying hair and a belly that showed he'd traded chasing criminals for eating donuts a long time ago. Marlon pushed the door open without knocking. Doug didn't even look up. Well, well, if it ain't Marlon Hayes. To what do I owe the pleasure? Marlon didn't waste time. A woman checked into Earl's motel about a week ago. Left 2 nights ago. She was scared, bruised. Might have had a baby with her. That got Doug's attention. He slowly lowered the newspaper, squinting at Marlon. That's so. Marlon crossed his arms. You hear anything about a missing person? A woman who might fit that description? Doug rubbed his jaw, thinking, can't say I have. But bruised, scared, running, sure sounds like trouble. Marlon's patience was wearing thin. I need to know if anyone's been looking for her. If someone's reported a missing girl matching that description. Doug let out a long sigh, finally sitting up and leaning forward. Marlon, you got a bad habit of getting yourself involved in things that don't concern you. This concerns me. His voice was firm. There's a baby. She was abandoned. And if that woman was her mother, she didn't leave her behind because she wanted to. Doug exhaled through his nose. And what do you want me to do, exactly? Go chasing after a girl with no name? You ain't even sure she's the mother. Marlon clenched his jaw. She didn't just leave town, Doug. She ran. And if she was running, there's a damn good reason for it. Doug studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Fine. I'll check the databases, see if there's any reports that match what you're saying. Marlon nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Doug pulled his chair closer to the desk and started typing into the ancient computer, the machine humming loudly as it processed the search. Marlon watched as the sheriff's expression slowly changed, his usual lazy demeanor shifting into something more serious. A few seconds later, Doug let out a low whistle. Well, hell. Marlon stepped closer. What? Doug turned the screen slightly. There's a missing person report filed out of San Antonio. 19-year-old girl, Lena Carter, went missing about 2 weeks ago. Marlon's heart kicked up a notch. Doug scrolled through the report. Family reported her missing after she disappeared from their house in the middle of the night. No sign of forced entry, no robbery. Just gone. Is there a picture? Doug clicked on the file, and a grainy photo popped up. A young woman with dark hair, short-cropped, sharp brown eyes that looked directly at the camera. She was thin, her face holding the kind of tiredness no 19-year-old should have. Marlon didn't need to second-guess. This was her. Doug leaned back. Says here the family's been real active in trying to find her. Hired a private investigator and everything. Marlon's stomach twisted. Something wasn't adding up. If she had run away from home, why was she covered in bruises? Why had she looked so terrified at that motel? What do we know about the family? Marlon asked. Doug clicked through a few more pages. Father's name is Charles Downing. Wealthy businessman out of San Antonio. Owns a bunch of real estate. Donates to charities. Looks real respectable. Marlon's blood ran cold. Charles Downing. He wasn't just some businessman. He was one of the most well-connected corporate lawyers in the state. If he was looking for this girl, it wasn't just about a missing daughter. It was about control. Doug kept reading. Stepfather, actually. Married Lena's mom about 5 years ago after her dad died. Huh. He clicked his tongue. Something don't sit right. Marlon exhaled. His instincts had been right. Lena hadn't just run away, she had escaped. And if Charles Downing was looking for her, it wasn't out of concern. It was because she had something he wanted. Or someone. The baby. Marlon's gut twisted. Penny. The pieces were coming together too fast now. Lena had fled her stepfather. She had been hiding, scared, bruised. She had given birth alone. And then, either out of fear or desperation, she had left her baby behind. Because she knew someone was coming for her. Doug sat back in his chair. I can call this in. Let San Antonio know we might have a lead. No, Marlon said quickly. Doug looked up at him, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. If Charles Downing has this much power, Marlon continued, he'll have people watching. If he finds out where Lena was, he'll send someone before you even get a chance to act. Doug frowned. You got a hell of a theory there, Marlon. Marlon's jaw tightened. It wasn't a theory. It was the only explanation that made sense. And if he was right, Penny wasn't safe. He turned to leave. Where the hell are you going? Doug called after him. Marlon didn't stop. Home. He needed to get back to Penny before someone else got there first. Marlon's truck tore down the wet roads, the tires kicking up bits of gravel as he pushed the speedometer past limits he hadn't tested in years. His grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white. His heart pounded against his ribs, each beat a hammer of urgency. Something wasn't right. The second he had heard Charles Downing's name, an instinct buried deep in his gut had told him everything was about to go very wrong. Downing wasn't just some worried stepfather looking for a runaway girl. He was powerful, connected, and dangerous. If Lena had been running from him, she had good reason. And if he knew about the baby. Marlon pressed harder on the gas. The town blurred past him in streaks of muted color. The general store, the gas station, the quiet streets still damp from the storm. None of it mattered. His only focus was getting home. His cabin sat at the edge of town, nestled between thick trees, a place that had once been his solitude. Now, it was the only protection Penny had. When he turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to his property, his stomach twisted at the sight in front of him. A car, black, expensive, parked near his porch. Marlon slammed the truck into park before it had even fully stopped, throwing open the door and stepping out, his pulse roaring in his ears. A man stood near the front steps. Tall, well-dressed, polished. He didn't belong here. Marlon's eyes darted toward the cabin. The door was closed. No signs of forced entry. But someone had found him. The man turned, and the second Marlon saw the smug, practiced smile on his face, he knew exactly who he was dealing with. Charles Downing had come to collect what he thought belonged to him. Marlon forced himself to stay calm, even as rage curled in his chest. "Can I help you?" His voice was steady, but his entire body was coiled, ready. Charles tilted his head, as if amused by the question. "You must be Marlon Hayes." His voice was smooth, rehearsed, the kind of tone used to convince, manipulate, win. Marlon didn't answer. He didn't need to. Charles sighed, glancing at the cabin. "I won't waste your time. I'm looking for something, or rather, someone." Marlon took a slow step forward. And what exactly would that be? Charles studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "A little girl," he said finally. "My daughter." Marlon's jaw tightened. Liar. Charles Downing was not Penny's father. But Marlon played along. "That's so." "Yes." Charles smiled again, too polite, too fake. "She was taken from my family. A tragic situation, really. But I'm here to make things right." Marlon could feel the barely restrained arrogance beneath the man's words. Charles was used to getting his way, used to people stepping aside when he spoke. Marlon didn't step aside. "I don't know what you're talking about." Charles's smile faltered, just for a second. Then, he sighed. "Mr. Hayes, I know the baby is here." Marlon didn't move. He didn't blink. His mind was already running through the worst possibilities. If Downing had tracked Penny here, what else did he know? Did he know Lena had been at the motel? Did he know she had tried to escape him? Charles took a step forward. "Let's be reasonable. I have paperwork proving my connection to the child, and I have the resources to ensure she's placed in the right hands." Marlon's fists clenched at his sides. He had spent enough time around people like Charles Downing to know one thing. He wasn't here for a family reunion. Penny wasn't just a lost child to him. She was a piece of leverage, a bargaining chip, a loose end that needed tying up. Marlon exhaled, slow and steady. "If you have legal documents, I suggest you take them to the sheriff." Charles let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Come now, Mr. Hayes. I think we both know how this ends. Do you really want to involve the authorities? That would only complicate things. For everyone." There it was. The threat. Veiled beneath charm, wrapped in expensive suits and polite smiles. Marlon stepped forward, closing the space between them. "If you had a legal claim, you wouldn't be standing here on my property, trying to talk me into handing her over." Charles's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened just enough for Marlon to notice. Marlon took another step forward, forcing Charles to step back. Good. Let him feel it. Let him understand that this wasn't a negotiation. "I don't know who you think you're dealing with," Marlon said, his voice low, measured. "But you don't walk into my town, onto my land, and tell me what to do." For the first time, Charles hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. Marlon didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked toward the cabin, his every muscle wired with tension. He could feel Charles's eyes on him, waiting, calculating. Marlon stepped onto the porch and opened the door, closing it firmly behind him. Only when he locked it did he exhale, his chest rising and falling with barely contained anger. Then, he turned. The cabin was quiet. Penny was still sleeping in the makeshift crib he had built from old wood, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully, unaware that a man had just tried to take her away. Marlon ran a hand down his face. This wasn't over. Charles Downing had walked away today, but he would be back. And next time, he wouldn't come alone. If you're enjoying this story, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. Marlon sat in the dim glow of the cabin, the only sound the soft crackling of the fireplace. Penny lay asleep in the wooden crib he had built for her, wrapped snugly in blankets, her tiny fingers twitching in dreams. She had no idea that a man had stood outside this very door, calling her his. Marlon leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. His mind was a storm. Charles Downing had found them, and that meant this wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a countdown. He had dealt with powerful men before, men who spoke in carefully chosen words, who never made direct threats but carried the weight of danger in their presence. Charles was one of them. He had walked onto Marlon's land today, expecting obedience, expecting him to roll over, to be intimidated. He had left empty-handed, but he wouldn't stay that way for long. Marlon knew how this worked. Charles had resources, connections, money. And money bought a lot of things. Information, legal pressure, men who did the kind of work that didn't require paperwork. Marlon rubbed a hand over his face. He had no legal claim to Penny. If Charles came back with the right people, with the right documents, the law would be on his side. Unless Marlon found the truth first. Lena Carter was the key to all of this. If she was out there, alive, she was the only person who could prove Charles Downing was lying. That Penny wasn't his daughter. That he had no right to her. But where the hell was she? A knock at the door shattered the silence. Marlon's pulse jumped. Not Charles. Not this soon. Still, he moved cautiously, grabbing the hunting knife he kept near the fireplace and tucking it behind his belt before stepping toward the door. He cracked it open just enough to see who was there. Dex. Marlon exhaled and pulled the door open. Dex Porter stood on the porch, shaking rain off his jacket. He was in his early 40s, with a sharp face and sharper instincts. A journalist by trade, he had once worked in Dallas before something, Marlon never asked what, had driven him to settle in their small town, writing for the local paper. He was the only person Marlon knew who had a real nose for digging up the kind of dirt that powerful men wanted buried. "You look like hell," Dex said, stepping inside. Marlon shut the door. "Yeah. Well, hell showed up on my doorstep today." Dex glanced around the cabin, his gaze landing on Penny. His expression softened, but only for a second before he turned back to Marlon. "Maggie told me you were asking about a woman." Marlon nodded. "Lena Carter." Dex let out a low whistle. "That name sounds familiar." Marlon crossed his arms. Doug pulled a missing person report from San Antonio. She disappeared 2 weeks ago. No signs of a struggle, but she had bruises. Her stepfather is Charles Downing. Dex's face darkened. "Downing? You know him?" "Oh, I know him," Dex muttered, rubbing his jaw. "Guy's a shark. Takes on high-profile corporate cases, gets his clients out of anything. Embezzlement, fraud, doesn't matter. If someone has enough money, they don't lose with Downing in their corner." Marlon clenched his jaw. That fit exactly what he had suspected. Charles Downing didn't chase after things he didn't want to own. Dex narrowed his eyes. "Tell me exactly what happened." Marlon laid it all out. The night he found Penny, the woman at the motel, the visit from Charles. The way the man had looked at him as if he was already calculating his next move. Dex listened, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When Marlon finished, Dex let out a long breath. "That baby," he said slowly. "You think she's Lena's?" Marlon's stomach twisted. "I don't think. I know." Dex nodded, his journalist instincts already firing. "All right. Then we need to start with Lena. If she ran, she had a reason. And if Downing wants that baby, it's not out of the goodness of his heart." Marlon already knew that. Dex pulled out his phone, scrolling fast. "I have a few contacts in San Antonio. If Lena was hiding, maybe she left a trail." Marlon ran a hand over his face. "We need to move fast. If Charles was willing to show up at my door, he's got something planned. Something bigger." Dex gave him a sharp look. "Then let's make sure we're ahead of him." A sudden noise, soft, barely audible, made both men turn. Penny. She had woken up, her tiny fists rubbing at her eyes, her mouth moving as she let out a small, tired whimper. Marlon felt something shift inside him. Dex watched as Marlon crossed the room, lifted Penny into his arms, and cradled her against his chest. She settled instantly, her small body curling into him like she knew she belonged there. Dex exhaled. Jesus. You're in deep, aren't you? Marlon looked down at Penny, his fingers brushing over the soft curve of her tiny hand. She's not going anywhere. His voice was quiet, but full of absolute certainty. Dex nodded. Then we find Lena. Marlon met his gaze. No, he said. We save her. Dex wasted no time. He pulled out his laptop and set it on Marlon's worn wooden table, the dim glow of the screen casting sharp shadows on the cabin walls. The tension in the room was thick, and Marlon could feel it pressing against his chest as he stood near the crib, Penny still nestled in his arms. She had fallen asleep again, her tiny fingers grasping the fabric of his shirt. The thought of her being taken away, of Charles Downing getting his hands on her, sent a slow burn of anger through him. Dex's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. "All right," he muttered, eyes scanning the screen. "Let's see what we can dig up." Marlon shifted his weight, his voice steady. "Start with Lena Carter. If she ran, there's a reason. And if she was hiding, she had to have left something behind." Dex nodded, already searching. "First things first, we check hospital records. If she gave birth, there might be something, even if she tried to stay off the radar." Marlon's jaw tightened. She was running. She wouldn't have walked into a hospital unless she had no choice. "Maybe," Dex agreed. "But childbirth isn't easy, especially for someone alone. She might have needed help." The room was silent except for the sound of keys clicking and the low hum of the laptop. Marlon stood near the fire, keeping Penny close, his mind running through the possibilities. After a few minutes, Dex let out a sharp breath. "Got something." Marlon moved closer. "What?" Dex turned the laptop so Marlon could see the screen. "A hospital report. San Antonio General." The name on the file was listed as Jane Doe, but the details matched what they knew. Female, 19, admitted for labor complications, no insurance, left against medical advice after giving birth. Marlon's stomach twisted. She had been alone. No support. No safety. Dex scrolled further. She was admitted 5 weeks ago, which means... He glanced at Penny. Marlon's grip on the crib tightened. It meant Penny had been born in that hospital. Dex clicked again, pulling up the discharge form. She left the hospital the next morning. No listed address, no emergency contact. Just gone. Marlon exhaled. So she had the baby and disappeared, which means something scared her enough to leave. Fast. Dex rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Yeah, and I think I know what it was." He turned the laptop back to himself, typing in Charles Downing's name. A few seconds later, he pulled up a police report. Marlon's stomach clenched. What the hell is that? Dex's eyes were sharp as he read. It's from 4 months ago. San Antonio PD was called to a domestic disturbance at Downing's address. A neighbor reported screaming coming from the house. When officers arrived, they found Lena, bruised, shaken, refusing to talk. Marlon's grip on the table tightened. Bruises. Just like Earl had said. Dex kept reading. No charges were filed. Lena refused to make a statement, and Downing brushed it off as a misunderstanding. Case was closed the same night. Marlon's chest burned with anger. He was hurting her. Dex nodded grimly, and no one did a damn thing about it. Marlon looked down at Penny, sleeping peacefully. Lena had run, not just for herself, but for her child. Dex's voice was low. She was terrified enough to leave everything behind. But she didn't want to. She had to. Marlon set Penny down carefully in her crib, standing straighter. We need to find her before Downing does. Dex was already ahead of him. I'm checking bus stations, motels, shelters. If she had no money, she might have gone somewhere local first before trying to disappear completely. Marlon paced the room, hands on his hips. Every second they wasted, Downing was getting closer. If he was willing to show up at Marlon's doorstep, he wasn't far from tracking Lena down too. Dex cursed under his breath. Damn it! No shelter records, nothing from the motels near the hospital. He trailed off, then suddenly froze. What? Marlon asked sharply. Dex didn't look away from the screen. A missing person case was filed for Lena 2 weeks ago. I know that, Marlon said impatiently. Doug already found it. No, Dex turned the laptop again. A second report. Filed 3 days ago. Marlon's blood ran cold. By who? Dex clicked. A woman named Cynthia Ramirez. Filed it from a payphone outside a gas station in Austin. Austin? Marlon frowned. That's over an hour from here. Dex nodded. If Lena made it that far, she was running hard. He kept scrolling. Cynthia left a note in the report. Said Lena came to her for help, stayed one night, then panicked and ran again before she could do anything. Marlon felt his pulse quicken. Lena was alive, but she was still running. Dex grabbed his coat. We need to find Cynthia. She's the last person who saw Lena. Marlon didn't hesitate. He grabbed his truck keys. As he turned toward Penny, his expression softened just slightly. He leaned over the crib, brushing his fingers gently over her tiny hand. I'll bring your mama home, he whispered. Then, without another word, he and Dex walked out the door. The drive to Austin felt longer than it should have. Marlon's grip on the steering wheel was firm, his knuckles white against the leather. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty, the darkening sky hinting at another storm rolling in. Fitting. The past 24 hours had been nothing but a whirlwind, and the weight of it pressed heavy on his chest. Dex sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed. Cynthia Ramirez, he muttered. She's not just some random Good Samaritan. She's got a history. Marlon glanced at him. What kind of history? Dex exhaled. Social worker. Used to run a women's shelter in Austin. She's been advocating for domestic violence victims for over a decade. He tapped the screen. She's the exact kind of person Lena would have run to. Marlon processed that. If Lena had trusted this woman enough to ask for help, it meant she had nowhere else to go. Dex frowned. But here's the part that doesn't sit right with me. Marlon waited. Cynthia filed the missing person report anonymously, Dex continued, which means she wasn't just worried about Lena. She was scared. Marlon's jaw tightened. Dex sighed. I don't like this. Neither did Marlon. The truck rumbled down the highway, past old diners and empty fields. Austin was only an hour away, but the closer they got, the worse the feeling in his gut became. They pulled into the city just after dusk, the skyline looming ahead, a sharp contrast to the quiet town they had left behind. The address Dex had tracked down led them to a modest house tucked away in an older neighborhood. The porch light was on, casting a dim glow against the siding. Marlon killed the engine. Dex glanced at him. We go in careful. She's not expecting us. Marlon nodded, but his focus was on the house. Someone inside knew where Lena was, and he wasn't leaving without answers. They stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against the gravel. Marlon walked up the porch steps, knocked twice, then stepped back. A few seconds passed. Then, the door creaked open just enough for a woman to peek out. Mid-40s, tired eyes, cautious. "Cynthia Ramirez?" Marlon asked. She hesitated. "Who's asking?" Dex stepped forward, hands raised in a show of peace. "My name's Dex Porter. I'm a journalist. This is Marlon Hayes. We're looking for Lena Carter." The second he said Lena's name, something shifted. Cynthia's face hardened, and she started to close the door. Marlon caught it with his hand. "Not forcefully. Just enough. We're not here to hurt her. We're here to help." Cynthia stared at him, searching for something in his expression. Then, after a long pause, she sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in." They stepped inside. The place was small but warm, the kind of home that felt lived in. Books stacked on the coffee table, a blanket draped over the couch. A safe place. Cynthia folded her arms. "If you're looking for Lena, I can't help you." Marlon held her gaze. "You already did." She frowned. "We know she came to you," Dex said gently. "We know she was scared." Cynthia exhaled, rubbing a hand over her face. "She was scared. More than I've seen in a long time." Marlon felt his chest tighten. "Did she say why?" Cynthia nodded. "Her stepfather, Charles Downing." She practically spat the name. Marlon exchanged a glance with Dex. They had been right. "She didn't tell me much," Cynthia continued. "Just that she had to get away from him. That he—" she hesitated, her throat working as she swallowed. "That he hurt her." Marlon's jaw clenched. He had already known, but hearing it out loud made his blood boil. Cynthia sighed. "I wanted to help her. Told her she could stay as long as she needed. But the next morning, she was gone." "Did she say where she was going?" Dex asked. Cynthia shook her head. "No, but she was terrified of being found. She didn't even want to use my phone. Said they might be watching." Marlon frowned. "Who's they?" Cynthia hesitated. Then, softly, "Downing's men." Marlon's stomach turned. Cynthia continued, voice low. "She told me she wasn't just running from him. He had people looking for her. She said if they found her, she'd never be seen again." The room went silent. Dex let out a slow breath. "Jesus!" Marlon's pulse thundered. Lena hadn't just been running. She had been hunted. He took a step closer. "Did she say anything about a baby?" Cynthia hesitated, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. Marlon softened his tone. "Please, we need to know." Cynthia exhaled. She never said the word baby, but she talked about her. She kept saying, "I have to protect her. I can't let him find her." Marlon's chest tightened. She had been talking about Penny. Cynthia sighed. "I don't know where she went, but if she's still running, she's running out of places to hide." Marlon's mind was already racing. They needed a new plan. Fast. Cynthia hesitated. Then, her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't think she's alive." The words hit like a punch. Marlon froze. "What?" Cynthia looked pained. 3 days ago, a body was found in a river just outside of town. Young woman. No ID. Dex's expression darkened. "And you think it's her?" Cynthia swallowed. "I don't want to. But when I heard, I had a bad feeling. Marlon's breath was heavy. No. He refused to believe it. Lena had fought too hard. She had risked everything to save Penny. She wouldn't just. He took a shaky breath. Where's the body? Cynthia hesitated. Then, city morgue. Marlon turned to Dex. We're going. Cynthia grabbed his arm. Marlon. He pulled away gently. If it's her, I need to know. Cynthia's eyes softened. And if it's not? Marlon's voice was steel. Then we keep looking. Because as long as Lena was out there, scared, alone, running for her life, Marlon was going to find her. The morgue was colder than Marlon expected. The artificial hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the tiled floor. The place smelled of disinfectant and something else. Something heavy, something final. Marlon stood near the entrance, his shoulders tense, his fists buried in his jacket pockets. He didn't belong here. Lena didn't belong here. Dex had pulled a few strings to get them access, flashing his press credentials and throwing around words like investigation and public interest. The medical examiner, a thin man with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dr. Avery, had barely looked at them before leading them into the viewing room. Now, as Marlon stood in the freezing space, staring at the metal table covered by a white sheet, something inside him twisted into knots. Dr. Avery sighed, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. She was pulled from the river 3 days ago. No ID. No missing person report that matched. We were waiting for someone to claim her. He glanced between Marlon and Dex. You sure this is who you're looking for? Marlon didn't answer. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to see what was under that sheet. Dex shifted beside him. We just need to be sure. Dr. Avery nodded and, without another word, pulled the sheet back. Marlon barely breathed. The body was pale, waterlogged from days in the river. Dark hair clung to the woman's face. Her lips were slightly parted, her arms stiff at her sides. But the moment Marlon's eyes locked onto her features, he knew. This wasn't Lena. His chest caved with relief, his breath coming out in a quiet, shuddering exhale. Dex let out a slow breath beside him. It's not her. Dr. Avery studied their reactions. You're certain? Marlon nodded once, his jaw tight. It wasn't Lena, which meant she was still out there, still running, still in danger. Dr. Avery covered the body again, his voice softer now. If she's missing, you should act fast. A woman alone. Well, let's just say I see more of them in here than I should. Marlon swallowed hard. He didn't need the warning. He already knew. As they walked back outside, the night air was thick with humidity, the storm clouds overhead threatening rain again. Marlon pulled in a deep breath, steadying himself. Dex checked his phone, then sighed. All right. We're back to square one. No, Marlon said, his voice firm. We're closer than we were. Dex gave him a look. We don't know where she is, and if she's smart, she's staying invisible. Marlon nodded. Yeah, but she's scared. Alone. And she needs help. His gaze darkened. And I don't think she has much time. Dex exhaled. So what's next? Marlon's jaw set. We go back to the beginning. Dex frowned. The beginning? Marlon turned to him, eyes sharp. The motel. She stayed there for days. She was hiding, but she was also waiting. Dex caught on. Waiting for someone. Marlon nodded. And if we find out who she was waiting for, we find her. Without another word, They climbed back into the truck and drove into the dark. And if you liked this story, you'll surely love the next one appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.